Hello and welcome to Sounds Heal Podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Brown, and thanks so much for joining me as we continue to explore the fields of sound healing, sound therapy, and generally the use of sound for health and wellness. Today, our guest is Tony Neck, the principal of the Sound Healing Academy, and I've known Tony for many years now. Some of my initial trainings were through the Academy. I began teaching workshops for the Academy years ago now, and also for several years, I've been the region lead teacher for North America for the Academy. So I definitely have experience with Tony, and I really enjoyed just going deeper and getting to know a bit about his background. And I so appreciate the Academy's approach, really immersive, deep dive into sound healing, right? So these aren't just a couple day workshops where suddenly, you're a master sound healing practitioner. Um, these are in-depth courses where it takes practice, case studies, really to become qualified. So we learn more about how that all began. And his journey into the world of sound healing is a fascinating one, from his early years immersed in the rhythmic drumming of Africa to the resonant Gregorian chants at a Catholic abbey school. His path has been deeply influenced by diverse musical and spiritual traditions. His exploration of Tibetan Buddhism and Shiatsu Oriental Medicine further shaped his approach to healing and then into sound healing. So in this episode, we dive into these experiences, the evolution of the Sound Healing Academy, and its significant role in the broader context of global wellness. We discuss the Academy's innovative training programs, the integration of scientific research, and the balance of the art and science of sound healing, as well as Tony's exciting upcoming projects, including his upcoming presentation at ISTA, the International Sound Therapy Association Conference at the end of September in Sarasota, Florida. And so whether you've studied with the Academy before, whether you're curious about the power of sound or are a practitioner, this episode promises to be a deep dive into the art and science of healing through sound. This episode is sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa, located in Sarasota, Florida, and online at theomshop.com. They are the country's largest showroom of vibrational tools, crystal bowls, Himalayan bowls, gongs, tuning forks, as well as a lot of custom, interesting instruments as well. And they can just be extremely helpful when you're looking for that specific instrument and you're just looking to up-level your toolkit, your practice. They also have workshops, trainings, and resources. So check them out at theomshop.com. And thank you so much for their sponsorship. And I want to thank you all for listening and supporting this podcast that really helps share the perspectives and limitlessness of this field of sound healing. Please enjoy this episode with Tony Neck. All right. Welcome, Tony. It's so great to have you here on the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, you're really welcome. And I'm so delighted to be here. And thanks for inviting me along.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was a matter of time. We've actually tried this once before and had some technology issues. So here we are. And, your background's really interesting, and whether people know about you or the Academy, there might be things that they don't know about you. And so I'd love to go back and talk about those parts that were really foundational for like who you are and your life's path. So maybe highlight some of those things that were really foundational when it comes to sound, music, and spirit.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's quite difficult to just pick out a few things, but I would say, just kind of going a bit chronologically, the fact that I was born in Africa, I think, is significant, right? Because I was living in a house on the edge of a town, and right next to that, or just like, just a mile or half a mile away, there was this village. And So a lot of my childhood experiences in, growing up there was in relation to that village, where what often emerged was this spontaneous drumming, that would happen and come out of that. And so often in the early evenings and things like that. And so I just have this memory etched in my mind of this kind of continuous rhythms and beat. And then I used to kind of go down there and explore and had a few friends and had an experience of that kind of the power of that connection that can come in a community from drumming and the sounds and the music and the dancing and all of that. It was like a powerful resonant kind of quality there for me that has stayed on. So that's like one thing. And then the next thing probably is when I was early teenager, when I was at a school run by Catholic monks, and it was an abbey school. So there were these monks from the abbey who would be practicing their Gregorian chant, basically, as part of their daily succession of rites and prayer and ritual and so on. And I was particularly attracted to that. And I befriended quite a few of these monks, and they invited me into those sessions. And so having the experience of that quality of sound from the monks chanting these Gregorian chants in an abbey where the acoustics were absolutely amazing was also, I would say, a foundational experience, because I really did feel like I was connecting to something pretty deep and profound in those moments. And then later on, when I went to university, I met up with some Tibetan monks, Buddhist monks. And again, there I got involved in a meditation group and experienced the power of chant. And in this case, in more the Buddhist context. So obviously the Catholic monks, that was the Christian context. And so again, I had this amazing experience of the power of sound for healing, transformation, and so on in that environment. And so I guess that what was happening there for me was, the sound, particularly the sound of the voice and chanting, combined with this kind of more spiritual context, I guess. And having those two elements combined seemed to be particularly powerful for me at the time, and has stayed with me all this time. And so what emerged out of that was that when I was at school there, I also joined the choir, the school choir, and I started to get involved in performances and things as part of the choir, and that thread stayed with me as a singer, basically, in choirs, not really so much on my own or anything like that, but in choirs, and that's been a thread throughout my life as well. So from a kind of musical perspective, I would say that I'm not an accomplished musician with any one kind of instrument or anything, but the main thing that's been constant has been more the singing and the vocal work, and the kind of that sort of spiritual context that underlies it, I'd say, has been important. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's such a wide variety of contexts and settings, but all kind of the power of group, community, whether it was in Africa with the drumming or choirs. That in itself is a spiritual experience, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It all depends how we define spirituality, but absolutely, it's part of everyday spirituality. I think that's what's significant about that. The more abbey, monk-like setting was definitely a communal experience, because this was the monks coming together. That was when they really did come together for their collective communal practice, and I felt like part of that. And then with the Tibetan Buddhist groups, it was in a group. All this was happening for me in a group. I mean, I had my own daily practice kind of outside of that, but the real power was in the groups. I don't know whether I've told you this story, but I remember when I was in one of these groups there, I must have been about 20 years old, and it's not a particularly brilliant story in some ways, and you'll see why in a minute. But we were sitting in the group. It was like a Sunday, I think, and it was like all day meditation practice, and so we were sitting there, we'd done these visualizations and everything, and then the mantra kind of chanting, and then the silent period after that. And so everyone was sitting there. There's probably about 15, 20 people in the room. And I noticed that on either side of the altar, there were these bunches of daffodils. Must have been springtime, I guess. And I started looking at them, one in particular, and on the left-hand side. And I noticed that suddenly that one of these daffodils just went like that. It was like just collapsed. And I went, oh, okay, what's that? How did that happen? And was that something to do with me, or, you know, what's going on here? And then I thought, well, what would happen if I look at the the daffodils on the other side, you know, in the vase over there? And I looked at that, and one of them went like this as well. And I thought, blimey, okay. So, and then I went back to this one on the left, and another one went down. So I just kind of thought maybe there is something going on here. You know, it's not necessarily a very positive thing, right, with these daffodils collapsing, but nevertheless, I think to me, it felt really significant somehow. It's like there'd been all this practice, this chanting, now the silence, and now with this kind of attention that, you know, we can project something, you know, unintentionally in this case, but it was maybe a projection of some state of mind or something there in the background that was leading to that. And I thought, okay, so there's something non-material, non-physical here going on. And that sparked a lot of interest in me for the rest of my life, essentially.
Yeah, just even kind of the unknowing of why, but that there's some kind of energetic effect happening,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
in that moment. So, you know, I don't necessarily know the order of how these things happen, but it seems like you did end up studying a lot of different, you know, things that have to do with Tibet and India, and then Oriental medicine and Shiatsu. What kind of were the next steps that helped you just follow your interests?
Yeah, I mean, what happened for me was that you know, and I reflect back, I can see it a bit more clearly than I did at the time. But I think what happened was that when I was engaging in this quite kind of intense way at that time, I did come back to it later in my life, but at that time with the Tibetan Buddhist practices, I experienced a kind of like an inner transformation, I would say, where I did feel, in a sense, more open and connected with the natural world, with nature, with the nature of being, and in that, I became basically an environmental activist, and so I was doing a PhD at the time, and I kind of dropped out of the PhD and started to throw myself into this environmental activism and you know non-profit groups and all of that, and so this was in the 1970s, and so I got involved. One thing led to another, and I got very involved in all of that, and I ended up basically running an organization, one of these non-profit environmental organizations, and it kind of grew quite quickly and so on, and it was all great. But what I noticed was that I was sitting behind a desk more and more, and I started to. This was like what you know. I'm more aware of this now about what was going on, but I started to feel like I was disconnecting a bit from people somehow, and it just happened that this was when I was living in Glasgow, Scotland, that I somehow heard about this workshop for Shiatsu, Oriental Medicine, you know, this bodywork type thing. And so I went along to one, like an evening class, and I liked it. And then I went along to this weekend workshop type thing, and I kind of just really liked it. I just really loved the connections that we were making and what was going on there. And so I went along to a few more, and Elaine at the time, Liectie, who was just starting up with being a teacher, you know, I said to her, this is really great. You know, how can I, you know, progress this and dive more deeply? And she said, well, I don't actually offer any other training, but I've got this friend in Bristol in southwest of England who's just starting up a 3-year practitioner diploma course. And if you're interested, I could give you his name and number and everything. And so I followed it up. And then within a few months, I quit my job and I went down to Bristol and I joined this course. And again, that was incredible. You know, that was an amazing experience, and it did set me up for, you know, practice basically, which I ran for a few years, initially full time and then part time again. And yeah, I would say that that was a really foundational period in my life in terms of appreciating the benefits of, you know, complementary medicine. Again, there's an energetic nature to that because a lot of focus on meridians, and basically it's working on the basis of Chinese medicine combined with an understanding from Japan and so on. So Oriental in that sense. And but I think what was really good for me about that was I had an experience of a training program that was quite extensive. You know, we covered anatomy and physiology as well as all the rest of it. And it lasted 3 years. And basically every month for those 3 years, we would have a weekend workshop, and then we were obliged to or encouraged to practice between, you know, every week, do 2 or 3 practice sessions with people. So over 3 years, you know, that was like doing 150, let's say 150 practice sessions a year. So by the end of 3 years, you know, you're pretty competent. And it was a really well put together program. And I think it's that kind of quality of an appreciation of the depths that we can reach, and in competence and skill and understanding of what's really going on, that has stayed with me. So that when I came later to be involved in the sound healing training, you know, that's the kind of, you know, that's the kind of quality of training. That's the kind of intention that I bring to it. You know, and I think that's what we do in the Sound Healing Academy is really value the benefit of like a real, like more in-depth kind of training, more, you know, encouraging that it's not just about what you can teach in a class or on a video, but it's about building up a practical experience of it that's really important. And of course, you know, if you're a musician or a singer or anything like that, you know, you can't expect to just go and perform on the stage, you know, for solo or with other people, unless you're, you know, you practice, right? You know, and most musicians practice every day, don't they? Mostly, so one way or another. And it's a bit like that. You know, why should this be any different?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The practice, the experience. And yeah, I think that's such an important piece of this work, is that we're always learning through practice and experience. And yeah, so let's set up the groundwork a little bit for what led to the Academy. And really anybody that's gone through Academy work, you know, what any of our programs know, the kind of backdrop, the overarching approach of the integral theory. And now that's something that you've been studying perhaps since the mid-90s. So maybe just talk a little bit about that approach, your own kind of understandings of that, which led into the philosophy or teachings of the Academy.
There's a lot there. Okay, so what happened for me was that, as I mean, I've been a curious person all these years, and so although I got that whole kind of like Shiatsu, Oriental background, you know, medicine background, you know, I was still interested in what was going on in the West, right? And what was emerging as themes, as a philosophy, as kind of new directions, and somehow believing that, or recognizing also that over the last, well, by that time, pretty much, you know, 100 years, there'd been these great sages and mystics and people coming from India and other places, China and even Japan, you know, coming into America and into Europe and introducing some of these practices. And so there was a flowering, there has been a flowering, and there is a flowering of that wisdom that's taken root in what we call the West. And it's got a different flavor and a different kind of way of relating to the essence of what's being taught there. And I just found at the time that the work of Ken Wilber was very inspiring to me. and but not just him. You know, there's like a whole kind of almost like culture around that developed. So there was the people at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, who I connected with there, who were teaching and developing something called integral transformative practice, or ITP. And I actually went there and studied with George Leonard as well at the time. This is about early 2000s, and learned all of that. And so, yeah, so the understanding there is that in this context is that, yes, it's about integrating the benefits and the wisdom of science, as well as, you know, the wisdom schools from the East, let's say, or even from within the West, you know, the wisdom schools within Christianity, as well as you know, other places. And but it's about also appreciating that if we do a combination of practices, let's say a combination of activities, then there's a gestalt there. There's something bigger than the parts that emerges. There's a kind of, there's a process that of change and transformation that and healing that occurs in a sense more quickly and more consistently and more effortlessly in a way if there's a combination put together. And that's what attracted me to it. And that's another aspect of the integral as I see it. And so it's a question then of, well, what is it that we're doing, you know, and what is that package that became interesting to me. And clearly, you know, there's an energetics of this, there's an energetic structure to it that I was really aware of. And so this kind of idea that we need to value and appreciate the more objective side of things, the more scientifically validated aspects of our being, and what goes on with our health and wellness on the one side, and that's more the exterior as it's seen, as well as what happens more on the inside, you know, more the internal dynamics of that, you know, that is about, you know, what happens with our thoughts, our emotions, both for ourselves and with others, and that there's this kind of hole there that we need to pay attention to, and it's not just one thing or another, it's all of it, right? And I think that that's really important to me, and being able to value that. So being able to recognize that if we're wanting to give attention, say, more to states of being, you know, or emotional states or mental states or spiritual states, that's more of a kind of like an inner dimension, and that these can't be measured and by so-called scientific kind of methodologies that have been developed up to this point. But it doesn't mean to say they're not real and they're not valid. and so, yeah, so it just provides a bit of a map of the territory for me that's been valuable. And I think that what we're trying to do then with the integral approach to sound healing is to be paying attention to all of this and honoring all of these different aspects and the different domains there, and putting together a combination of practices, you could say, a combination of methodologies to it, which, you know, we've kind of like slimmed down into this kind of package called the 10 steps of integral sound healing, which is like, you know, foundational to that. But knowing that that is just really the gateway to something much bigger and more profound and more powerful than just the 10 steps. But the 10 steps are a nice kind of like thing to you know, framework to hold it on. And yeah, so that's kind of maybe the way it's gone for me with that one.
Yeah, yeah. It's just it's a way in, it's a viewpoint. And of course, with each step, for example, the 10 steps, there's so much within each 10 step to explore. Yeah, yeah. Well, so
The kind of
let's,
message there is
yeah,
for me, is that sound healing is not an event, it's a process, right? And yes, there's value in an event, you know, of course, it's not to discount that. But, you know, whether we're talking about one-on-one type of work or group work in sound bars and things like that, I think there's a cumulative benefit. And if we're conscious about the process of through that cumulative, aspect, then I think that's when we can affect the most change. And that's what I mean. It's not an event, it's a process. And the 10 steps is really all about a process. It's about how to kind of organize yourself and your client and all of that, all the activities there and the group work and everything around the process to make it really good and really effective.
Yeah, healing is a process, right? It's not a one thing fixes everything, right? We're always kind of uncovering aspects of ourselves. And so to go through a sound healing journey is just uncovering these aspects of ourselves, and it's a progression. And that's exactly why, what you stated early about the experience of practicing, and it's the same thing for people that you work with. And that's kind of why with the Academy, with case studies, you don't work with a client just one time. It's client over 4 sessions. How do we kind of set a goal and see where we get to? So yeah. So let's talk about the Academy a little bit. And you've been with the Academy since it's developed, and kind of before it was called the Sound Healing Academy. And you've seen the sound healing field develop so much over many years now. So yeah, how did that come about for you, becoming the principal of the Sound Healing Academy?
Yeah, well, I mean, in fact, the Sound Healing Academy was originally called the Colour of Sound Institute, or COSI for short. So the Colour of Sound Institute was actually founded in 2003 by Rachael Burnett and in the UK. And so she'd been through her own process of journeying and learning and developing to get to this point. And so I came along a few years later, in fact, and did my practitioner training with her in the late 2000s. And then when I got to the end of that, she said to me, had you thought about becoming a teacher? And I said, no, not really. I'm just enjoying this. But she said, I think you could be good. And I went, well, all right, then I'll give it a try. And so I went through a training program and then was kind of authorized to be a teacher and started to make some small steps in that direction. And then she said, how do you feel about taking over running this? And had you thought about that at all? And I said again, no, I hadn't really thought about that. It wasn't really why I was doing this. But she said, look, I want to go off, and I've just got this growing passion to write children's books. And I just need to have more time and space to do that. So I said, all right, I'll give it a go. And so that was in 2010. And so that's when I got, and it took me a couple of years really to get going with it. I needed to establish my own practice and all of that, and feel confident that I could actually teach this properly. And then so we kind of got going technically 2000, at the end of 2011, beginning 2012. And so the next few years were just frantic. I was just going around the place, running all these workshops here, there, and everywhere, and more people were coming. It was I suppose in some ways it was early days for sound healing training. And, I was having like 35, 40 people in a workshop, for 4 days at a time. It was like, and I was doing it and handling it all on my own initially, which was in retrospect a really bad idea because there were some tricky moments, and I learned a lot from that. I learned that this stuff is powerful, and it can trigger deep trauma basically in people that has been buried there in their unconscious or subconscious for a long time, or deeply in their body tissues and cells and so on. And then in this kind of sound work we do, that can just come out, and you've got to be prepared for that if you're willing and able to go deeply into it. And that was always my intention, was not to skim the surface, not to try and just be nice and easy with this and just create a nice experience, but to create the opportunity for people to really go deep and to heal and transform. And so naturally, there was all these kind of challenges coming up. And so what happened was that some of the people who'd been with me on the training started to come forward and to say, well, how about, if I could help, and assist. And so kind of like organically, this process of people becoming assistants to me on the workshop started to emerge. And that was really great, So Rosha, who's one of our key kind of teachers and now region lead with us, she was one of those people from those times. And it's just made such a difference to have a small group of people who were there able to support and hold the energy, hold the space. If somebody was, having a release and in some way, emotional, physical release in some way, and they needed a bit of personal attention without disrupting the whole group, they could just take them out the room and sit with them and do what they did. And it was fantastic, and so I guess that helped to lay the foundations for something quite profound as well, because that's the way we operate now. And then alongside that, I had this idea that all these workshops are really good, but we're only reaching a few people here at a time, even though they were relatively big. What would it be like if we could do like an online program? And so this was at a time when there weren't that many online programs, and certainly none in sound healing, really. And so we were quite pioneering with this. And I had to learn how to do this as well, because basically it's what I call the first phase of our organization, of the Sound Healing Academy. It was actually, while it was still called the Color of Sound Institute. And the model was me essentially as a soul trader, a soul kind of person, trying to do everything. Okay, there was getting some help and a bit of support from people, but I was trying to do everything and working crazy hours and all of this and feeling really kind of like fired up to get this done. And so we started these online programs in a small way, and then it got to the end of 2015, and there was something in the air, something which said, we've got to do this differently, and so a kind of strategy emerged, and we said, look, let's change the name. And we in 2016 we started calling it Sound Healing Academy, and then we started to say, well, let's actually recruit some people to support and run this with us, because us being myself and Jane is my wife, because she kind of got involved. She's got a whole history behind her of different modalities, healing modalities as well. And I actually met her through singing in a choir. So that's a really nice connection there. And so, yeah. And so what I was trying to do, one of the things was starting to sell a few instruments, sound healing instruments in the workshops. And she was kind of getting those organized and packing them up when I was taking to the workshops. And then it was like, people after the workshops will say, well, I didn't buy that there, but could I buy it now? And then organically, this idea of running a shop, basically for the benefit of the students with the instruments emerged from that. And so she got more and more involved in running the shop side of things. And so anyway, in 2016, we called it Sound Healing Academy. And I would say that was the start of what I now see as being the second phase. Right? The first phase was, in a way, I like to think of organizations in terms of life cycles, a bit like people, right? And so that first phase, I would say, was all about like early years stuff. And then the second phase that I think is now coming to an end, and we're about to enter a third phase, I think it was more about what you might call the go-getting, more like adolescent, young adult kind of phase. And it's not to get, there's lots of really good qualities of this, but I think we're entering into now more of a mature phase, more of like, we're going for prime now. This is the prime time, right? That's what we're entering into at this time. And I think that, in a sense, mirrors what's happening with sound healing generally is I think we're entering into a more mature phase of that, right? And so it's not a coincidence that, you know, the organization is going through a similar thing. And so, you know, what you have with a life cycle, you know, in terms of a person is that they, you know, they go through the early years, adolescence, adulthood, midlife, you know, and then you get this kind of dropping off, old age, and then people die, and at least physically. And so it can be like that with organizations. But I think what is also possible, and you know, and maybe it's the same in our kind of physical life as well, is that we can do things to kind of like keep going along the top of the curve for longer, you know, and that prime time top of the curve kind of thing can extend, you know, in an organization for a long period of time, and you know, it doesn't necessarily fall off, you know, the end too quickly, and that's the kind of vision I have for what we're doing here.
That's a really great way to put it. And, you know, from my perspective, to see it in that way. And I agree. I mean, we're definitely, whatever phase we might be in as an academy, with the curriculum development we're doing right now and the inclusion of heartfulness and trauma-informed work. Yeah, we're really just kind of up-leveling the offerings. And you know, we talked a bit about, I think what's important to note about the Academy and why I so value the work of the Academy is that it, you know, it's not just a couple day workshop and we send you off and you're good to go. It is that experience piece. It's in depth. I just recently had one of my level 2 students say to me, "This is like a college course. Like there's some work there's a commitment here." And, you know, and I think that quality, that practice, um, does get people ready to, you know, to really become qualified as a practitioner. Besides that experience piece, you know, what do you think sets the Academy, you know, kind of different than other offerings that are out there? What are you really proud of when it comes to the Academy?
Well, I'm proud of the team. You know, I'm proud of what we're achieving as a team, and what more we can do as a team. You know, I think we got. I mean, there's about 60 of us now. I mean, I was chatting to some of my colleagues the other day there, and I was saying as part of the story, you know, like phase 1, phase 2, color of sound, sound here, and I said that I noticed that when I took over in 2010, the Colour of Sound Institute, precursor to Sound Healing Academy, had been going 7 years, right? 2003 to 2010. And when I took over, there was a practitioner register of 70 people. So of course, on average, that's like 10 people a year, isn't it? Getting qualified as a practitioner, which is roughly like one a month, let's say, you know, in a year. And then the team, it was actually Nida and the tutor team. Nida said, "Hang on a minute." Dudula looked at the database, and she said, "Hey, in July, like last month, we issued 26 level 2 diploma certificates, and in the first 2 weeks of August, you know, there's another 20 or something." And it's like, well, what we've done is we've gone from, you know, one a month to one a day, essentially. You know, and so that I'm proud of that. You know, I'm proud of the fact that people are graduating with us, having gone through this quite extensive training program, knowing that they have been assessed rigorously as well for their quality and everything. And we're not just letting them loose out there. You know, so these are good people with a good experience and good training, and they're now able and feel confident to go out into the world and really offer this in a professional way, in an effective way. And if we've got, you know, one of these people a day you know, like going out into the world, that feels good to me, you know.
Yeah, there's like this ripple effect that's happening
Absolutely.
in an exponential way. I mean, if you think about whether it's you were the first teacher, right? And now we have 60 people on the team, and you just think about really time-wise how quickly that's developed. That's kind of the sound healing field, right? There's just such a need right now. It's blossoming in a big way. What do you kind of consider the state of maybe just global wellness or in general, or just, being involved in sound healing community? What do you think the state of things are right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's really blossoming. I saw some statistic the other day that suggested that just in terms of money, dollars, the global wellness industry is worth 1.7 trillion dollars a year, right, these days. Okay. I mean, my mind, you can't even comprehend how big that is in a way. I mean, I know there's a lot of noughts there, but that is massive. And so in a way, yes, I feel proud of the fact that we've got, one practitioner a day kind of being qualified. But even then, it's like, well, what's that going to be? That's going to be 300, 400 a year or 500 a year or something. Of course, it's very important and very significant, but think how many people there are in the world, right? And so to me, when I think about phase 3 going for prime, I think that really what we can do and what we should be doing, it's almost like a calling for me, is that we need to be part of the movement. And it's not like we're doing this as a Sound Healing Academy on our own, but we're part of a broader movement that is really needed in this world to create the kind of shifts that are needed for us to survive as a human species on this planet and to thrive while we do that, to be well and to thrive. And so, because it's not just that there's a lot of mental health challenges around in the West, and it's a massive issue, and physical health challenges, and a lot of that is caused, I think, by lifestyle and mindset and all the rest of it. But, there's also a lot of genuine poverty, in the world, not just in the West, but obviously in places like Africa and South America and so on. It's really pretty serious. And then we've got the whole climate change kind of thing happening. There's a lot of suffering around, and I just feel like it's really important that we're making a really effective contribution that reaches increasingly more people in the widest way possible, and to be part of that movement, and to be doing it with integrity, and to be doing it with a vision of wholeness, is really important to me. But I think that also what's important is that, as the Sound Healing Academy, is that we are willing and able to embrace developments in science, right? And I think when you pointed earlier to how, we embrace the issues of heartfulness, I think there's an increasing body of evidence around what that is and what that, the benefits of that. And how it links into the autonomic nervous system and heart rate variability, and the effect of, and the relationship with the polyvagal system, the parasympathetic, the sympathetic aspects of that autonomic nervous system. And so I think, we've been pretty good at embracing that kind of awareness and understanding, and then starting to integrate it into our teaching and into our practice. But I think there's new kind of fields emerging there, right? There's new, it's not really new anymore, but it's not really been embraced by, the wellness industry particularly, or the sound healing, practitioners so much. But so this relates to, more emerging trends in, let's say, neuroscience. So one of the things that I'm particularly fascinated in at the moment, and is something that I'm preparing like a talk on this at the ISTA Wavemakers conference that's happening next month now in September, is a talk and a kind of, really a talk around what I'm calling in sound, like that stands for integral sound, but in sound, right, beyond the relaxation response. Okay, so what I want to look at is what is known as the default mode network, part of our brain that is involved in processing spontaneous thoughts and feelings and so on, and looking at how we can activate that in a more profound way using sound healing practices, and then what are the physiological and other health and wellness benefits from doing that in a concerted way. So, you know, that is a whole new piece, I think, to introduce onto the table. And, you know, I'm hoping that people, I mean, I've already started to embrace this myself, right? And starting to practice with this. And I'm seeing really amazing benefits. And the freshness to it is that this kind of research into the default mode network has been carried out quite intensively by researchers in universities over the past like 20 years. But more recently, there's been some research done in Norway, in the Oslo universities, which I'm particularly connecting with at the moment, that I'm finding absolutely fascinating and puts a whole fresh perspective onto what is going on in our brains and how this relates to the brainwave frequencies, you know, the beta, alpha, theta, delta kind of brainwave frequencies. What's the connection between that and the default mode network? And, you know, and then what's the, you know, so it's all about the being able to, you know, understand the significance of the studies that have been done using the resonant imagery of the brain, right? The functional, I think it's the magnetic resonant imagery of the brain that we're talking about here, and being able to then map out what happens in different parts of the brain when different activities are going on. So it's based on that kind of research that's been done. But I will be putting together a presentation around that, which I'm hoping will be of real interest and value to people.
That does sound fascinating. Wow. Yeah. So at the ISTA conference, that's, I think, September 20th through 22nd in Sarasota, Florida. Right. I'll be sure to link to that. I think it's nearly sold out, but I think there's a few spots left. So I'm really excited to hear about that. And yeah, I think that's a good point that, you know, even if perhaps we don't come from a research background, maybe science is not the hugest interest to us when it comes to this work. I think actually having an awareness of some of these things that are going on, and there's so many different scopes of research going on that actually do have a lot to do with our work and, you know, shine the light on some of the impacts of this work.
Well, I mean, if we just talk about a couple of examples, right, just to kind of make it less, you know, cognitive, scientific, blah, blah, you know, it's like, do you have the experience? Okay, I mean, I know that we kind of like we play the instruments and we give the sound baths, right? But if you're a participant in a sound bath, or even in a one-to-one setting, if you're receiving the sound healing one-on-one, I have an experience of, oh, you know, I'm relaxing, you know, and then what happens is that I start to, it's like my mind just wanders around. You know, I get all these thoughts and images, and I get these memories from the past that come up, and I start thinking about the future, and maybe I'm thinking about what am I going to do tomorrow in my job, or, you know, and then I get these emotions that are connected to all of these feelings, and some of those are happy and some of those are sad and some of those are something else, angry maybe, and I'm aware of that, and that all comes up. And then I kind of like might just drop into a kind of a deep state of something where I'm not aware of anything really going on, and I'm just in this present moment awareness, and you know, and all of that is happening, and that's great, isn't it? It's like a typical kind of experience that I have, and maybe a lot of other people have, and so what this research is doing, and the experience of this practice, is like saying that this is all a natural part of our brain function. But this default mode network that is allowing that to happen in healthy individuals actually can get impaired, right? And typically, this cognitive impairment happens with old age. And so dementia, Alzheimer's, and so on comes in, right? There's a lot of people getting older all the time. And Alzheimer's and dementia is one of these kind of like rising problems that we've got in our society. And the research is pointing to how and I believe, we haven't actually done the research in relation to sound healing, but I think there's enough evidence which shows that what is going on here is that we're actually able to activate the regions of the brain associated with that kind of functioning, the default mode network, right? And in doing that, we're integrating parts of the brain in a way that slows down, right, that cognitive impairment, right? And so to be aware of that and to know that is actually a really powerful thing. And also another example is, one of the practitioners here, she reported how she was doing work with severely autistic children in a special education school. And this particular boy, he was quite young, I think, I'm not sure, 7 or 8, had been in the school for a few years. And he was basically nonverbal, he didn't communicate with anyone. And so, she went in, did a few, and this is the point, is that it's not just a one-off thing, but she did a few sessions with this boy. Particularly, he resonated with the drumming, the handheld frame drum, and did a lot of drumming around him. And after a few sessions, he started to speak, right? He started to connect with people again. And the people in the running the school and so on, they couldn't believe it. They went, "Wow, this is incredible," right? And so you think, okay, well, that's just sound healing. That's great. That's all really good. Of course, it helps. People with autism. But it's like, actually, the research is showing that people with autism, or people who are living, on somewhere on the autistic spectrum, which at one end kind of touches into ADHD, you could say. The functional end of autism maybe has got that kind of characteristic. And then at the other end, you've got these people who are really like closed down, nonverbal and so on. What they're finding is that the default mode network is actually switched off, is not very active. It doesn't fire very much, right? And so there we have it, that if we can do things in a certain way that activates and fires and integrates these default mode parts of the brain, then that is actually going to help to explain and direct the kind of things that we do to make it even more effective, right? And I think that's the point of the science. It's not that everybody needs to go away and study all these papers like I do, but I think the benefit of an academy is that someone like me and you and others, that we can present this information in a digestible, easily accessible way to inform the practice of sound healing in a fresh new way that makes it even more effective. And hopefully at some point soon, there'll be more and more money coming in to do the proper research of what we do so that we can truly validate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think that's really interesting and also inspiring. I find it very inspiring to hear about these different types of things that are happening. Of course, we all know, if we're involved in this field, how amazing it is, and so many things can happen for people. And I think that's why we're all involved in this field, right? It's just so interesting. But yeah, that's right. I think there is really a potential. I don't exactly know when or how it's going to happen, but I think grants, for research and integrative medicine itself, I think the merging is happening. So I think we're just it's on the horizon for us. Hopefully.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation on that. And again, just that aspect, just that, that piece of it shows how limitless this field is, the impacts of this field. Anything you want to leave us with? Anything else inspiring you right now? Anything else that you're interested in, or a final story that you can think?
I mean, I've just come back from Norway. I had a week's retreat over there in beside this lake outside Oslo, and it was a wonderful experience. And and I was connecting with the people who were doing this kind of research I was talking about, and in this context, it was a retreat where the practice was more of what they call a sound-based meditation practice, and it involved, quite a few hours each day of the meditation practice, and they call it a deepening retreat. So I felt very privileged and honored to be there, and I got an amazing amount out of it. But I would say that experience recently for me feels very informative, very inspiring, and for me, I think is, because they're all relating to this default mode network and the understanding of that and so on. And so when I talk about it in this way, I feel like I'm coming from my own personal experience around this too. And I would love to share more about that personal experience, but in a way, it's not maybe the right context just now. But that for me is kind of at the leading edge for where I am, and happy to share that more widely. And in fact, we've got a vague kind of idea of running a webinar on it at some point in the future, and then making it, just a free thing, just making it available for people to come to. And, that might be of interest to some people later on as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a great idea. And again, it's just a reminder of, those of us involved in sound work. I think we all just are excited to learn more and experience more. And when you go to a workshop like that or another training, it's a reset, it's a refresh, it's a different perspective that just gets you jazzed again to keep learning more. So yeah, that's just a great reminder that we're all doing that. We're always learning. We're never done. We're never masters of anything, really, isn't it? Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Tony. And really, I mean, it's not only an honor to do this episode with you, but it's just an honor to be involved as I have with the Academy. And I just, sing the praises of the Academy. So thank you for your great work and just for up-leveling this field, through the organization of the Academy.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you again for inviting me along. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. But Natalie, you yourself have been an immensely important, valuable part of this team. I know it's not the only thing you do, but it's the contribution you've made to this team development and all that we do is really immense. And I want to honor you and thank you for that as well.
Thank you, Tony. That means a lot. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for tuning into this 5-year anniversary episode of Sounds Heal Podcast, sponsored by the Om Shop and Spa. You can keep up to date with what's coming up next at soundshealstudio.com. You can follow and check out things at Facebook, Sounds Heal Studio, Instagram at Natalie Brown, Sounds Heal, on YouTube, on the Sounds Heal Studio channel. And thanks again for supporting this podcast. Be well and stay tuned.